Hi guys, I'm Anup and I work with IBM Asia Pacific. My specialization is specifically into data and AI, and I have been doing this for last couple of decades. So today I'm happy to be here and share with you my experience in terms of how we can leverage data for innovation. I think we all talk about innovation, and innovation comes from asking questions, right? Unless we ask some new questions, right, there's we cannot start the thought process of innovation. Now, just to give you some examples around this, specifically in the context of data, like for example, one of the telco I've been working on, they started looking at, is it feasible that they can put the 5G cell towers in a hibernation mode and can reduce the power cost of running the 5G towers. And they did that and they found a significant, you know, cost optimization. Similarly, in terms of supply chain, we looked at whether it is feasible to do a dynamic routing, for your package delivery instead of a static routing and see if it can help you improve customer success. And I've been working with one of the big supply chain vendor, and we found that by leveraging dynamic routing, we can cut down both the cost as well as improve the efficiency of delivery. Similarly, you'll find a lot of such examples where we start asking questions and get some new insight. I have been in data and AI for last 15 years, and when I look at everybody is talking about leveraging data to make new insight and database decision, but what stops them? And I have seen three kind of companies. The number one is specifically, I will say that where the data is very much locked down, right? So they are protecting the data like as a very, I will say, important asset, which is important, right? You have to safeguard your data, but at the same time, when you're talking about innovation, the innovation comes from collaboration, and you can collaborate only if you start sharing. So while I encourage that you do protect your data, you know you have to protect the right kind of data in a right way. If you start protecting and if you start locking everything, then basically you are stopping the collaboration and the innovation part, right? So I've seen a lot of such organizations where the data access is very much to the privileged few, and that basically stops you to do innovation. The second kind of company, right? And again, I will say this is, maybe you can say left, right, and center. So if protecting the data was left, the right is where the data is all available, right? But it is in a form where the user doesn't know how to consume it. And this is a big problem, right? You all have heard about 80% of data being unused. Now, why it is not used? The number one reason is, first of all, the quality of the data, right, is not, I will say, fit for use. The second can be, a lot of time, if you talk about data quality, it can be data deduplications, right? The data is duplicated at multiple places. Sometimes the data is available in a different forms, right? Like for example, since last decade, a lot of this data were in unstructured documents and people were not able to use for any analytical purpose, right? So that's the second kind of organization where we see that there's a lot of data, but this data is all scattered across multiple systems. That's what we call as silos. And basically, if you want to consume this data, it's a nightmare, right? Because you don't know whether you are picking the right data. And in that process, you spend so much of time that the innovation goes into the backseat and you are more focused on the engineering part of it. So you saw the left and right. I will try to bring you to the center, like what is the ideal way to overcome the problem over data protection and the problem of data silos. Now, just to give an example for that, ING Bank, one of very well-known name, and similar to a lot of banks, you'll find that there are data silos. There's core banking data, then there's a customer information data, and this data is all is scattered everywhere. ING Bank did three things, right, which make bridging those silos. First, they created a data catalog, and this data catalog, by no matter where the data is, right, whether it's in multi-cloud, whether it's basically sitting on one of their on-premise server, they were able to generate a catalog which shows all the data assets, all the models. It can be just a ER model, or it can be a machine learning model. All the assets they had, they put it into a catalog and brought it a central place, right? That way, now this information is available to anyone who want to use it. The second part, while having a catalog based on the metadata is good, people need to access the data as well. And of course, data lake is one approach to do it. In case of ING, they took a different approach. They tried a combination of data integration and data virtualization. And by that way, they're able to cut down the delay in accessing the data. And the third part is basically leveraging stuff like I will say automations in all their process. So for example, when we are doing the cataloging, we use this concept of auto catalog, where as soon as a new source is discovered, it is cataloged. The same way in terms of building the machine learning model, as soon as means the users can use tools like auto AI to create a model, right? And this is what I would say is the future going forward. If you want to innovate, you'll have to be sensitive about your data, but don't be overprotective, right? Same way, make sure that there's a collaboration between the teams, and that collaboration comes through a concept of data catalog, right? Now, all this concept together, what IBM is calling, basically a data fabric, right? So you have different sources, and we have this, this term is a bit newly coined, but the idea has been there for a long time. And just to simplify, what data fabric we really mean is an abstraction layer that hides all the complexity of security, access to the data, data located at multiple places. You are just abstracting those complexity and making sure that the users, the applications, can leverage the data in a seamless way, right? So if you look at data fabric is not a single technology, but it's a combination of basically an architecture, right? And a combination of tools and technology which you can help basically to do the simplification. So if I have to give a one word for data fabric, I will say simplify your whole data architecture. So let's look at a bit more, right? Like what basically, this is still a bit high level, but let's look at, what I mean by core component of when you're trying to build a data fabric layer. So the number one, right, which is the most important part, and I talked about, what ING did, creating a data catalog, right? And the data catalog basically is, this concept has been there for, some time. I remember, we doing all this ER diagram. We're used to take, all the physical and logical objects, right, and putting all together as a logical model or a physical model. But that was very specific to a specific database, But when we are talking about a data catalog, what we are talking about is the asset can be anything. Asset can be a model, asset can be a machine learning model, it can be a notebook, it can be a set of code, it can be, also some data set itself, right? And data catalog combines all of this. Now, when you are building this data catalog, it is very important to solve the first problem, right, which was over data protection, that you have this concept of right data classification, right, making sure that you are able to identify, which data element connect to which business terms, right? So there is this whole concept of, defining auto intelligence, right, which basically builds, I will say, connect, the dots between the technical metadata and the business metadata. And that's what I define as an intelligent data catalog. The second part is more around, the data orchestration. And that basically means, intelligent data pipeline, which is more self-service, right? And also, you know, as the things are changing, right? When the things are changing, something at the source level or at the target level, it is able to adapt itself, which is important part of, building a data fabric which is consistent, with time. The third part is more around security, right? And again, I'm talking about security, but not in terms of protecting the data, and blocking it, but more in terms of sharing it in a meaningful way, sharing with responsibility, right? And that basically means the right people should get the access to the data. Also, there are a lot of regulations, like, you have now GDPR, and there are different forms of such regulations based on, GDPR concept. And that basically means you have to make sure that the sensitive informations are protected. And this is where, instead of trying to do traditional approach of like where you identify first what are those sensitive data, and then you go and do the masking, encryptions, or any kind of a security, is maybe, simple rule-based protection, go and apply into each system. Here we are talking about a central data governance policy, right? Which basically means you have the rules which identify, automatically labels which data is sensitive, you know, and based on the sensitivity of the data, based on the rules, based on your LDAP configuration, provide access to the data automatically, right? And this is how you foster a culture of collaboration without compromise. And the fourth part is more around, I will say, uh, using the data itself. And what is the best way to use the data? Nowadays, it's AI and machine learning, right? There's no better way to, I will say, uh, get money out of your data, than leveraging it for some kind of, your machine learning and AI project. And this is where, we find a lot of challenge with the skills. And this is where, as part of the data fabric, what we are saying is, when you're building AI models, right, this whole concept of the catalog, the governance, the workflow, all gel it together with some automation, with some easy set of tools to help you accelerate the, the AI application development process, right? So what IBM is doing, as I said, data fabric is an industry term, right? But how IBM is, making the data fabric much easier and accessible to you is basically by using, again, automation. And this automation is like, you can say, it's kind of, AI to AI. I hate that term, but yeah, it is kind of AI for AI, where we are using, AI for doing auto cataloging of the data. We are using AI, within our tool to do auto privacy, which basically, what I meant was the classification of the data, sensitivity of the data, and protecting it, right, based on these dynamic rules. Rules, you may change your group from one organization to another, and immediately, you don't have to bother about, waiting for a couple of days. This dynamic policy will make sure that, okay, you have access to the new set of data which you need, right? So that's what we mean by, like this four pillars, right, around cataloging, in terms of data engineering, data privacy, and the machine learning. I will say those are some of the important pillars of data fabric. Now, while I talked about, let me, quickly demonstrate some of this capability. So I'm going to do a quick demo, and the first part, just to give you a glimpse of, you know, how the data catalog looks like, right? And then one of my favorite tool, the Auto AI, right? I'm just going to demo to you, and you look at how Auto AI leverages, the concept I talked about, to make, to accelerate your innovation. I talked about this concept of catalog and what catalogs looks like, Uh, so here I've logged into, IBM platform called Cloud Pack for Data. And Cloud Pack for Data is a multi-cloud, data platform. Uh, that basically means, everything I talked about, data fabric, all those components, the services, the tools you need, it's all available over here. But let's look at the data catalog. So here you see that I've logged in and I can see some set of data over here. So you can see there are around 114 different items, and there's the naming conventions and all. It looks like a real because my friends just love to import data, and this is like a demo environment. So you just keep importing the data over here, and you can see over here there are certain data by through data steward. Then I have a friend who has uploaded some data, and so different users putting their data over here. Now I need some data, let's say for my a customer intelligence or customer insight project. So I go to highly rated data because I want to make sure I pick up the quality data. And here I see certain data related to mortgage stuff. And let's look at what this data is all about. So when I look at this data, one thing is I can look at some sample data over here. So I can look at what are the columns and everything available, right? So this data, one thing you'll realize that there are two columns over here, right? So for example, there's a column like, for example, you see here uh, number of cars, and down it says indicator. So this is where the auto, you know, cataloging comes into the picture. So what it has done is, it looks at, like, for example, over here on the right-hand side, ID is a physical table column, but customer is what it has coded. And this is based on the auto intelligence. It's saying that basically this ID looks like it's a customer identifier, right? Now, because when this intelligence happens, right, it becomes much easier to mash up data coming from multiple sources because the columns may be different name in each. But because I have this mechanism of identifying, no matter what the column is tagged, I can do the mashup, do the joins, and other thing in a much better way. Similarly, you can do a quick profile of the data over here, and you can look at, uh, if there are any gaps in the data. This also gives you a bit of understanding of the quality of the data. So, for example, over here, when I'm looking at ID, right? ID, usually it should be unique, right? And it says there are so many unique, right? It gives you the deviations. Similarly, for example, if I want to use, let's say, whether this guy applied online or not, right? For that purpose, I need to make sure that there's enough information available for both the variability. Otherwise, my model will be biased. And in this case, I can look at what is the uniqueness. How many have said yes, how many have said no. So this gives me a good idea about whether I can trust this data and what will the quality of my insight based on data. Now, the other important thing I told you is, very, very important is, the collaboration. And this is where you can look at, I have this options over here, where user can do a rating of the data, right? They can, add a new tag, if they didn't find the data useful or if there's some problem with this, they can do it all, right? So there's a lot of things going behind over here. As soon as this data is coming in, it's going through auto classification. If there was a sensitive informations like email ID and all, it will automatically be masked before it is shown to the user. And this is how, right, you make an intelligent catalog, right? And the catalog is showing all the assets, different sources, it shows your business terms, right? And it can be anything. It can be a data connection, data assets. It can be any of your physical files as well, right? So I would say starting of a data fabric is intelligent data catalog. Now let me show you, the second part of it, which is how you can accelerate the consumption. So, now I found the mortgage data right into the catalog and I added to my project. Let's look at, from consumption perspective, right, how we can accelerate innovation. So here I'm trying to, figure out if I can build a model, right, which basically predict whether, based on this mortgage, whether this guy is going to default or not, right? Now, while, if you're a data scientist, you can do that, and go through like weeks of, I would say, uh, data transformations, data engineering, and then, building the model. Here we are providing as part of the data fabric a simple tool, right, to accelerate that journey. So this tool, for example, over here on the screen, what you see is called Auto AI Experiments. And what Auto AI Experiments allow you to do is, for example, very simple over here. I picked up those files from the catalog, the 3 files over here, right? And then just, because my catalog was able to tell me like, okay, you can join on this specific column, right? I'm able to, provide that. And then, I don't have to be, use a lot of my brain, like intelligence over here. I will use the intelligence of the machine to build this model. So here, without any further input, right, I'm just giving them, okay, this is the column, right, the mortgage default, which I want to predict, okay? And the rest of the things, I'm just leaving it as it is and run this experiment, right? Now, when you're running this experiment, you know, what Auto AI is doing is basically it is using, the power of, GPU behind and, all the machine learning concepts. And if you look at, it goes through the same cycle like what we usually go for, when you're doing this stuff manually, right? So typically a human being, right, will do that. You'll have a team which will take the data, split it into multiple parts, use some data for training, later for further training, and then once you have the model, you'll do the optimizations, right, to get the outcome. In this case, the whole pipeline, is being done automatically. And while I'm talking, right, you'll see that it's basically able to go ahead, right, do this, data engineering itself, right, joining the data all together, I'm able to come up like, a model, right? And the best thing is, I don't have to tell which model to use. So you see, what Auto AI is doing, while I can, just have this talk with you, it has already started the experimentation, right? And it will look for multiple algorithms and evaluate each algorithms, do a comparison. It is doing those optimizations, right, and making sure that whichever is the right model, comes to you. Now, while this is there, and this helps a lot to accelerate. What I have seen is also a lot of people feel that, okay, can I trust this model, right? What is being built over here? Because a lot of this stuff is just doing automatically, and it's like, can I trust a robot, right? In this case, the good part is, once it builds the model, we have this whole thing like, while it is building up, I'll show you, you know, when I look at one of the model which is it has built, you'll find that it gives you the whole model about, details about the model itself. It gives you all the feature transformation. It gives you the feature importance, right? Like which features were important for this. It gives you, stuff like model evaluation output and the confusion matrix, right? Which typically, the human person will be reading and then deciding, which is the right model. Now here, all these things are happening, as we are talking, right? So I would say, Auto AI is a great way, to make sure that, you accelerate your innovations by leveraging AI. So I hope you like, the concept of data fabric and you understand how a data fabric architecture can help you innovate. Thanks a lot.
For more updates from CXO TV, please like and subscribe to our channel.